Hi everybody, welcome back to the Master Flow Plumbing YouTube channel. Today we are actually going to replace a fill valve on a Toto Drake toilet. Instead of using the actual Toto OEM part though, we're going to go ahead and just use a generic part, which is a Fluid Master. It's just about at any hardware store. There is a cheaper version of it that looks just like it. Except for it's not a red cap on the top of it, it's just a black cap, and the box has got green on it. They're pretty much the same thing. I don't really notice much of a difference between them, to tell you the truth on that. But I use these because they say Pro on them basically. And we're going to go ahead and replace that OEM part with a generic part today. But before we begin, if you can go ahead and click that subscribe button down there in the lower right hand corner, that would be a big help to this channel. Thank you for doing it. Alright, so before we begin, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of get things prepped. You want to make sure you have a catch container to catch some water in, because this particular toilet's going to have some extra water left in it that we cannot pull out of there real easily just by flushing the toilet. So when you're going to do a project like this, you always want to shut off the shutoff valve to the water that feeds the toilet here. Flush the toilet. Let all the water out of the tank as much as possible. Now, as you can see down in the bottom of this tank, it left about an inch of water down there. So that's probably, I don't know, a quart of water or so. It's got to come out of there. Because when we go to take this fill valve out of here, it's going to come all over if you don't have something to catch it in. If you have a shop vac laying around and it's set up for sucking up water, you can go ahead and do it that way too, and boy, that's actually real easy to do. We're going to go ahead and get our parts ready though, before we actually start taking stuff apart. Now, on this particular flush valve, it's got a lock ring right here, and then you can actually adjust this, to different lengths. I'm going to go ahead and adjust it based on that. It's not a bad idea to hold it up to the toilet tank like that, kind of get an idea, on the length of it. I'm kind of looking at the bottom of it right here, and I'm going to take a guess at it that's probably pretty good. Once I get it to where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and lock that ring back down so it can't come apart. I'm going to go ahead and take this tube right here and put it on here like this. And this is the other end right here that goes on this tube. You're actually just going to kind of put this on here. A little bit tough to push on there, but there we go. We got that ready. Now, this piece right here is the rubber gasket that goes on the bottom of this, which will go through the top side of this tank. And this is what seals that tank so it doesn't leak. They come with this piece that's already in the center of it right there. It's just how they come from the factory. We're going to get that and we're going to discard it. Not much of a use for those. That's an old bullhead piece that they used to use on the old school supply lines. We're going to actually be putting on a brand new supply line today, because it's always a good idea to do whenever you're changing this part. It's got a little seal up in there and it mates up with this end on this, so one part to another. If you don't replace it, it's a $10 part. I mean, it's just silly not to replace it and take a chance on having a leak. So we're going to put a new one on there. Plus, these supply lines can get kind of old and brittle, as they age too. But now that we got that gasket and that center punched out of there and discarded, we're going to go ahead and actually just put this on here so that bevel is actually going to go down through the hole in the tank. So it goes on like that. All right, so we've got this all prepped and ready. This is our plastic nut. Now we're going to be taking that loose on the other side over here along with that supply line, but I'm going to show you real quick how this ultimately goes. This part goes down through the toilet tank like that. This part will be on the bottom on the outside of the toilet tank, and this nut will actually be going on there, and it will hold it on something similar in this fashion here. And then this supply line, this end right here, is going to go on to here. Basically, this is just showing you here because it's easier. This is a small bathroom. And then this end's going to connect up to your shutoff valve down there where that water connection is. Now, you're not going to be able to really see me real well while I'm doing this, so I'm just going to explain to you. When I go to loosen up this nut off that shutoff valve down there, make sure you use your other hand to hold back on that pipe coming out of the wall. You don't want to over torque that and snap that pipe off in the wall, especially if it happens to be a plastic pipe. I've seen a lot of homeowners actually do that over the years, just not knowing any better. I mean, it's not that they did anything dumb or anything like that. It's just that they just don't know. So yeah, it's very, very important to hold back on that pipe so you don't break it off. I'm a professional plumber and I've broken them before. Sometimes they're just not put on real well and you just never really know until you put some pressure on it. So anyways, we got this all prepped and ready to go along with our supply line. I've turned off the water to the toilet. I've actually gone ahead and flushed it, let all the water out of it. So now I'm going to take my channel locks and I'm going to reach back in here and I'm going to undo the supply line. from that plastic shank right down here, like I was talking about. I'm going to go ahead and loosen that the rest of the way by hand. I'm going to get a little bit of water out there. I have a towel down on the floor for that reason, so I don't make a big mess. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, as I said, hold back on that valve back there so I don't break a pipe off. I'm going to go ahead and take this supply line right off. I always like to have the new supply line on and ready to go after I change this part. I don't know, it's just the way I do it. You could actually do this part at the end if you'd like to. I just choose to do it right now. There's no particular order on that, but as you can see, that supply line has kind of got that shape to it. Well, and over the couple of years that this one's been in there, you know, it's already starting to kind of stiffen up compared to, like, say, this one. It was nice and floppy, and, you know, the rubber that's in the inside of it is still nice and soft. So we're going to go ahead and discard that one, and we're going to go ahead and put this one on there. By the way, if you can find these supply lines, I mean, pretty much all plumbers use these braided supply lines nowadays. I guess, you know, not all do, but, you know, a lot of us do. They're pretty foolproof. I mean, if you put them on correctly, they almost never leak. So this particular one, though, is a little bit better than your ordinary variety that you're going to find at the hardware store or the big box stores. This one actually has a metal end up on this side. A lot of them come with plastic. And if it's plastic, you need to be extra cautious with it. It's not that they won't work, it's just that if you over tighten and you crack it, that's a potential flood in your home. So this end's almost always plastic, or brass, you know, chrome plated brass, at least it better be. So I'm going to go ahead and get that on there on my valve and have it ready. So it just takes a second here to do that. Get it as tight as you can by hand. And then you're going to snug it a little bit with your channel locks. And then before I give it that final snug, I'm going to reach in here and hold back with my other hand so that I don't break that pipe off at the wall and have a big problem. So, all right, we've got that supply line ready to go. I'm going to kind of keep it out of the way here. I'm going to take my catch container. I'm going to have it ready. I'm going to put it underneath here. I'm going to take my channel lock pliers once again. I'm going to loosen up that plastic nut that's on the bottom side of that tank that actually holds this part in. In this particular instance, I got to actually use my channel locks backwards because it's just a really confined space down here, and this particular toilet doesn't allow you to do it the right way. It's just how it is. You got to be creative and adapt to the situation sometimes in this profession. So anyways, I've got that loose now, and I've got that nut off of there, and I've got my catch container underneath that hole. I'm going to pull this out, and as you can hear, it is draining the water out of here. I'm going to go ahead and kind of shake that off so I don't make a mess with it and just discard that over in our old parts pile. I'm going to catch as much of that water as I can. I'm going to let it drip out of there, but I have this one all ready to go, so I'm going to go ahead and push this down in here like this. That's already going to kind of stop that water, the remaining water, from dripping. I'm going to put that, let me show you. I'm going to put that nut like we talked about. I'm going to put that on there. I'm going to thread it on as far as I can by hand. Got to get it started first. There it goes. Thread it on there as far as I can by hand. And get it, you know, as tight as I can with my fingers. I'm going to take my catch container full of water and kind of set that aside. Usually the smart thing to do before you spill it is actually just do this with it. Just get rid of it. That way you don't knock it over with your feet and make a big mess in the bathroom with it. Now I'm going to take the other end of my supply line right here that we just talked about, and I'm going to go ahead and get that on there. Now, if you have one that has a metal end like this, be cautious. Metal going onto plastic and a pipe thread is real easy to cross thread. If you cross thread it, you're going to have a leak, and you're going to have to kind of start all over and go get a new part, and it's just going to be a big mess for you. So just take your time. It's frustrating sometimes to get this one, get these started on there, but take your time and make sure it's going on correctly. You'll know when you get it correct because you'll feel it actually go on, and you should be able to thread it practically all the way on by hand. If you can't thread it on by hand as far as you think it should be on there, you need to actually stop and probably take a breather and then go back at it, make sure you do it correctly. Like I said, this is the most common thing I see a homeowner make a mistake on. When they go to put these supply lines on there, they'll cross thread that nut on there, and then they'll have a leak. And often they don't figure it out until they wake up the next morning and they have a big mess in their bathroom. And if it's upstairs, it's going to leak down through the ceiling downstairs, and it's just a big mess. So anyways, I got it on there as tight as I can by hand. Now I'm going to go ahead and just snug it the rest of the way. As you can see, we've got everything. I'm going to go ahead and double check that plastic nut right there, make sure I've got that nice and tight. Now, that plastic nut that holds this part in, you don't want to over tighten that either, because you can break the toilet or you can break the part itself. So you don't want to over tighten anything. Just make sure you just tighten it just enough to where it's not going to be a leak or be a problem. I always get it as tight as I can by hand and then give it maybe another half a turn on each of them, something like that. I'm going to go ahead and actually take my towel that I had down here and kind of put it aside. It's easier for me to spot leaks if I see it on the tile floor versus on a towel dripping. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and take this tube right here, and I'm going to go ahead and put it back inside of here like this. You want to make sure you don't have any kinks in it or anything like that. It goes in there like that. Now, this is actually called an overflow tube. It's part of the flush valve assembly. This is the fill valve assembly. This is the flush valve assembly. Flush valve assembly actually has all this mechanism on here, so when you flush the toilet, this particular one is a fairly complicated one compared to the old style. We're not going to talk about much about that today other than just this, but this part of it though is called the overflow tube. So when we turn the water on, we want to make sure the adjustment on this is not going to allow the water to fill up over that overflow tube. Ideally, anywhere between a ½ inch and an inch below that top of that overflow tube right there is ideal. So I took a guess at it. I've done this before, so I'm going to guess that it's probably pretty darn close already. I'm going to go ahead and turn my water on. Go ahead and turn it on full force. And just watch. You should not have any water spraying all over the place. You shouldn't have any water leaking over here on the left-hand side on the floor. If you do, turn the water back off and try to figure out what you did wrong. That's going to be basically it though, folks. We're going to go ahead and let this one get filled up here and check that level. This particular house has a lot of water pressure and a lot of water volume, so it's filling up this toilet quite quickly. It'll just be another moment or so. Alright, you can see this part's coming up, raising the float. And there you go. Now, I'd also like to mention that this part actually works in a variety of different toilets. That's why I keep them on the truck. It's an easy fix, you know, I mean, rather than trying to carry a part for every single brand toilet out there. These actually are pretty commonly, used on a lot of toilets nowadays anyways, so it's a nice part to actually have. And that is the Fluidmaster Pro Series Pro 45 model. However, the regular model in the green box is just fine too. Okay, you can actually see where that water level's at. It's about a ½ inch below the top of that overflow tube right there. I'm going to call that good. You don't want that water coming over the top of that, because then maybe the toilet won't shut off because the float's not going to be raised up to where it needs to be because the water can't come up high enough. You don't want it right at the top either, because sometimes water pressures can fluctuate and that can actually cause a toilet to run too. So just make sure you kind of keep it about a ½ inch to an inch below that overflow tube. Some toilets even have a little black line on there to show you where it should be. We're going to go ahead and just give it a test flush. Now that everything's done, everything sounds good. That's going to conclude today's video. Before we leave though, I'd like you to go ahead and click that subscribe button down there in the lower right hand corner down there. It doesn't cost you anything to do it and it helps us out quite a bit. You folks have a good day.